Dr. Sean Riley from Tulsa Spine and Rehab calls ankle dorsiflexion the hidden culprit. Let's find out why. First off, Dr. Riley, what is it?
Sure, Scott. So ankle dorsiflexion, that's a big fancy term, but if you can imagine if you were kneeling, like half kneeling, one knee down, the other leg up, if you were to bring your knee kind of over your toe, or simply if you were just standing up and you were to bring your knee over your toe, that is dorsiflexion of the ankle. It's essentially flexion of the ankle. And plantar flexion would be the opposite. That's if you were to point your toe. So a lot of times when we stretch our, the old school, get on the curb or some type of elevated surface and lean your knee into it, and you're going to stretch your calf. For those of you with Achilles injuries in the past, you do some of that calf stretching and so forth. So the knee is in front of the toe. So if you can kind of visualize, that's what ankle dorsiflexion is. Well, many times, that is the culprit for some other problem upstream. I've spoken in the past about the kinetic chain. The kinetic chain is a philosophy that we have an alternating pattern of mobility and stability. So starting at your foot, I want your foot to be very stable. I want your ankle to be mobile. I want your knee to be very stable, hip mobile. So you kind of see going upstream, it's an alternating pattern of mobility and stability. What happens with the kinetic chain is once we start to lose motion in one area, it can affect some other segment or region upstream from there or downstream potentially. So with ankle dorsiflexion, it's essentially the ability to flex or move through the ankle. What happens is a lot of us that sit for extended periods, a lot of us that don't really pay attention to that flexion of the ankle, I guarantee, when's the last time you've moved like that? Not often. We have the potential to develop problems upstream, knee problems, hip problems, a lot of low back problems for ankle dorsiflexion. And so I talk about you lose motion. Well, I'm going to pick the motion up in some other area where I shouldn't be moving, i.e. maybe your low back. You start to develop some irritations there and you've got a chronic low back problem. In a previous segment, I spoke about chasing the pain. This is a very common example of going in with a low back pain. You get a doctor that just gets so zoned in on where you're hurting and doesn't consider other areas of dysfunction. So, let's say you go in low back pain, you're inflamed, you get on some medications and you manage the inflammation, a week or two, you feel better. Well, that's likely the problem's going to come back because you've got an area of dysfunction somewhere else, possibly in dorsiflexion. So even walking, a lot of patients don't understand. Like if you think about just simply walking, you strike your heel, you're off your toe. There's some dorsiflexion throughout your ankle. A lot of times when I screen someone and I determine they have a limitation or tightness in that area, and I watch them walk or their gait, they have an altered gait. And those patients out there listening or listeners that have had foot surgery especially, it's such a big deal because it changes your gait, the way you walk. And then when you change the way you walk, you're going to compensate, and it's typically going to set into your hips or your low back. So working on, identifying and reestablishing proper motion through that ankle, hopefully, limits the possibility of problems further on up. Not to even speak of is that, you start to develop lack of dorsiflexion movement in your ankle, and then your Achilles starts to get overloaded. Your Achilles is that big Achilles tendon down by your heel that works itself into your gastroc and soleus, two big muscles in your calf. So you stop moving properly, you start to develop irritation, aggravation on the tendon, you develop inflammation, you potentially develop Achilles tendonitis, which is not a good injury, really limiting. And once again, I go back to we're dealing with an injury now when we hopefully can just simply work on reestablishing some of the motion. Now, on that point, what do you do? How do I work on ankle dorsiflexion or flexion throughout my ankle? Simply, you can do a lot of calf stretches like I spoke about, or getting down in that 90-90 position with one knee down, one knee up, and just work on kind of bringing your knee over your toe while keeping your heel on the ground. That's a really, really good drill. You can wedge your foot up kind of on a curb or something like I spoke about. Work on bringing your knee in front of your toe. You'll really feel a good stretch up your Achilles, the back of your calf. And then, I'm a really big fan of any way you're able to self-mobilize. and we've spoken about self-mobilization in the past. Get a golf club, get a foam roller, get a lacrosse ball, anything you can to manually get in there on the tissue and break it up. So you can roll around on your calf, the lower and upper portion. We always want to stay off of the Achilles tendon. So down by your heel, we want to stay off of that, okay? So a lot of manual stuff to the soft tissue will start to break that up, and that will improve some of the flexion. So not only stretching is helpful, but also any type of manual procedure that we do. A lot of times as a chiropractor, myofascial release, different soft tissue techniques to break down the adhesions. But as patients, there's a lot of things that we can do as well to improve that dorsiflexion of the ankle. The goal is to avoid the injury to the knee, the hip, and the low back. And also, it will improve your gait.
The team at Tulsa Spine and Rehab is equipped with the tools and knowledge to have you performing at your peak. Contact them today at 918-743-3737.